Okay, Monday morning, it's freezing. Well, it's freezing for here. We're used to temperatures anything from 20 to 40 degrees, 45 degrees centigrade. Hi guys, today we're going to repair some holes in the ceiling. Okay, this is a type of job we come across all the time. We're in the middle of a bathroom renovation and we've got some holes in the ceiling from a light. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to sort this out is just to get rid of anything any loose material that's there. There's also a couple of old plugs here that are there from screws that have been into the ceiling. So we'll just push those out of the way, or get them right out, push them back. A screwdriver, or as I'm doing here, the edge of the trowel will do. It's fine. And push that one up and through as well. And then we'll simply give a scrape. So we've got a nice clean surface to actually start working with. Okay, the small holes are really easy to sort out. All we're going to do there is use a tape to go straight over the top. This bigger hole though just needs some extra plaster in there, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Just to make sure that we sort of get a nice firm seal and that it doesn't crack again later. Okay, so this tape is a perforated tape made specifically for plastering. I am aware that in other parts of the world there are different systems for doing this. This particular system really relates to Australia. We've got lightweight construction. We use plaster board and then the very light tapes going over the top. I'm aware in the UK and the US that they use completely different systems for doing this. So all we need to do here is cut a small piece and just place it straight over the hole. It has a self-adhesive back on it, and that will be enough for the plaster to grab onto and to work through. So we'll cover all of the holes, and in fact we've got a very fine line crack here starting to run through, maybe running through the ceiling. So what we'll do is we'll actually tape that a little bit larger than I would normally do, just to make sure that that crack doesn't go further in the future. One there, and we'll put one in here as well. Okay, so that's all we really need to do for that. Now we need to make a plug to go in here. Same thing goes, you can use the same technique for if you've got small holes in the ceiling that have had light fittings in. This big one over here we're going to leave alone because we've got a new exhaust. The electrician's putting a new exhaust fan in there once the bathroom's actually finished. So in order to make the plug, all we need to do is measure roughly the size. So in this case it's 30 millimeters, about 1.25 inches by 50 millimeters, approximately 2 inches. And we'll make a plug associated with that. Right, what you see here is I've grabbed a piece of lightweight plasterboard that I'm just going to use to fill the hole, and you'll see that on the back what I've done is I've measured out the 30 millimeters by 50 millimeters, but then also measured out just outside of that a bit extra, and then what we're going to do is cut this to make it fit the hole. So the first thing I'll do is just slightly score through the plaster, and the plaster will then break, and I'll cut through the other side. And then this is where it just gets a little trickier, but it's not too difficult at all. And all we're going to do is very lightly score through the plasterboard. And this is just a paper backing with plaster in the middle. Score through again, and score through a last time. Now, This time, instead of scoring both sides, all I'm going to do is I'm going to break it. If it'll break, carefully, here we go. Break it like so. And then I'm going to peel off. I needed my Wheaties this morning. Just try and do this carefully. And then peel off the plasterboard on the outside here. So, pop it down. And what we're trying to do is leave a plaster edge around the piece that we want to keep. So we'll just remove this. And we now have, that's a little bit of extras gone, a plaster plug that will go straight up into our hole. Does that make sense? Okay, now we're just going to take a little plaster plug, just do a trial fit to make sure that it actually fits, which it does in the ceiling. And now we're just going to put some plaster on. For plaster today, I'm just going to use some total joint finish. Normally what I would do, this is just a Boral product, there's lots of different products around there that you can use. Normally if I was doing a lot of plastering, I'd use a specific base coat and do 2 coats of that and then a top finishing coat. The reason I go that way is that a base coat will be dry in about 30 to 45 minutes. That enables me to do my first coat on the ceiling, scrape it off, do a second coat and then let that dry. Just makes the whole process a bit faster. But because this is such a small job, it's not worth going and getting, going and buying some base coat. So it's much easier to just use this which I've got in the truck. It's designed for base coats and top coats as well. And look, we've also got the weekend coming up, so it's okay for me to do 1 coat and then come back and do another coat next week. It's no disadvantage to the customer. When I'm actually doing some plastering, I like to use 2 trowels. First one, just a small trowel to get the plaster out of the bucket. The second small one on my first coat is good because it just gives you control of an area. We just want to keep this, this layer as small as possible, and then gradually what we'll do as we put our next coats on, we'll go slightly wider with the trowel just to be able to smooth the edges out. So for this first coat, all I'm going to do is I'm just putting a nice bead of plaster just in the right areas, watching that obviously where my hole is, plaster's going to come out. And we'll grab some more plaster out. A little bit more. Now, you don't have to be absolutely perfect with this first coat. Because progressively, and in fact, your plastering will probably look quite rough the first time you do it, unless of course you're an absolute professional, which I'm definitely not. But what will happen is you start to do more coats over the top. As long as you've got it relatively smooth to start with, what will happen is it will progressively get better and better, and as you sand a little bit, that you'll get to a perfect finish by the time you've got there. So what we're going to do now is just pop our plug in the hole, if I've got this right. Pop it up into place and just nicely bed it in because I've got plaster underneath it. So we'll just smooth that in nicely, and what will happen is the plaster underneath will bond with the paper, and that will make it give you a nice smooth and hard finish. And we'll just simply, for this first coat, finish it off with some plaster over the top. Just bed it in. And sometimes it's better just to do the minimum and then not try and do too much, let it dry, even if it still looks a bit rough, and then leave it. So we'll get that relatively smoothed off. And for this first coat, that's all we're going to do now. We're just going to let that dry and give it a light sand, and then we'll put the next coat on. So for the moment, we'll just leave it. Okay, Monday morning, it's freezing. Well, it's freezing for here. We're used to temperatures anything from 20 to 40 degrees, 45 degrees centigrade. And outside, it's only about -1, -2 today. Cold, wet, foggy, all the horrible stuff. So anyway, all we're going to do is put the second coat on this ceiling. It has dried over the weekend. Thankfully, customers have had their heating on. So just have a quick look at what we've got today. Okay, let's see. As you can see, it's got a couple of little creases in, but that's okay. We'll get rid of those. We'll just scrape that off, put some more plaster on it. Okay, all we need to do for this one, quick scrape, just to get any of the extra plaster off. You notice this time around we're using a slightly wider trowel than last time. So just to make the area sort of smooth out a bit better. And all we're going to do is just come a little wider across the whole area. Make sure we get a nice cover. And that's it, that's all we're going to do on this second coat. Then we're going to leave it, we'll give a quick sand off, and then do a final coat. So see you on the next one, and hopefully it's a little bit warmer. Okay, a little tough to see is where we've done such a good job of putting the plaster on. Once I've done 2 base coats, I like to give it a rough sand over with some sandpaper. In this case, I'm using an 80 grit sandpaper, and you'll see on the back the number right here, say P80. So 80 is a very coarse sandpaper, but once I've done the 2 base coats, yeah, that gives a rough finish, and then we're going to put a final top coat over the top, and we'll then sand that off smoothly with some fine sandpaper. So wrap the sandpaper around a block. You need a sanding block, or a small one or a large one, just so you get a nice smooth flat surface. And what we're looking to do is sand the edges so the edges are smooth. In fact, you almost get to the stage when you're finished that you put your hand, close your eyes, put your hands over, and you shouldn't be able to feel any ridges. So just go over the whole area. Don't be too rough with it, and yeah, and sand it off. Now I'm just going to turn the camera off because there'll be a lot of dust. And in fact, what we need to do is go and get our protective face mask before we actually start doing this, and an eye protection as well. All right, so we'll be back in a second. Okay, just as a reminder, when you're sanding anything like this, as I said, protective equipment, but also just make sure that you cover up everything on the floor, doors closed, that sort of thing, because there's a lot of dust and it really does go everywhere. Even a small amount of what we've done here, yeah, there's dust absolutely everywhere, so be careful of that, and absolutely masks and glasses as well. Okay, so this is just about done actually. It's come up really well. Even with 2 coats, we're almost there. But we've got a couple of little spots where I'd like to see a little bit more plaster over it. Just the 2 little spots in there. So what I normally do is just go and mark them with a pencil, and then from there what we're going to do is just put a little bit more plaster over the top and the job will be done. So 2 seconds, we'll do that. Okay, very final coat, and it goes the same for little jobs like this or bigger ones, is I then like to use that's about a 25-30 centimetre long blade. The advantage of that is, as you use it, it smooths the plaster out over a much bigger area, and so you get a nice feathered edge or a nice flat edge to work with. So we don't need much on this particular job just to finish it off. Just a little bit of plaster on the trowel, slide it over the top just to hide just the little rough edges that I can see in there, and one probably here, and one there. Now, if you were doing a full wall, you'd probably run this plaster over the full length of the joint, and especially if you've got a base coat which is quite coarse, quite harder, you don't get good edges, then you probably want to use a little bit more of this. So it's just a matter of finding the imperfections and then just running over the top with the top coat, and then we'll sand that off, and yeah, then we're ready for painting. Anyway, we'll be back to do that in the next, well, since this is dry, so probably tomorrow. Anyway, have a good day, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Okay, we're here on the final day. Okay, just got a few final ridges from the last coat of plaster we put on. So we're just going to use some 240 grit sandpaper with a little sand. You just rub your hand over just to see if your hands are really the best way to see what's happening. All done. One there. Job's finished. Easy as that. Now, just remember, if you like what you see, just like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one. See you soon. Coffee time. You can't do any job without coffee.